Okay, Hugo Race, thanks so much.
That's my pleasure. Are we going to go in English? That's great.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
cool.
absolutely. You're originally from Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah.
And how was the scene there where you studied making music? Any band you liked?
I mean, there were lots. There were lots of great bands. I was lucky. I got out of school in a pretty good moment for rock music. We already had the Saints, and everybody was crazy about the Saints. They were like the trendsetters ahead of time. Yeah, Chris Bailey, late Chris Bailey, and Ed Cooper, who's still going strong. But yeah, and that became Laughing Clowns. That was another favorite band. And obviously the Birthday Party. They were monstrous at the time, and as it turns out, I ended up playing with them. So that was pretty funny. Dead Can Dance were really cool. And you know, there were others, but I'm thinking about 1980. Like really, that was when I got out of school. So, I mean, some really good bands were just about to happen. Like Beasts of Bourbon, I think Axeman's Jazz was 1983. Mm-hmm. That was a big record. There were a lot of great bands I listened to from overseas, but these were the bands that would come near where I lived and play shows so I could go and see them. And that was a really inspiring time for me. It made me want to play in a band. The music was so powerful, and the audiences were very into it. So going to a show could be, not always, but could be quite exciting at that time. And I'm sure there's a lot of other bands that I haven't mentioned.
Maybe Radio Birdman?
Yeah, Radio Birdman. I wasn't really crazy about their sound, you know, no offense, guys, but anyway, they were very popular. Back in 1980, it was a revolutionary vibe, really, that I ended up in just by chance. It was all about revolt against the norms. And there was this sense of doing something that hadn't been done before. So there was a real excitement to it. There wasn't any sense that we would be successful or I would be successful. It was definitely a passion, because all these shows were happening in small pubs. But yeah, in Melbourne, it became a very exciting scene, and the thing to do was to go overseas. You know, everybody wanted to go to London, and nobody had the money to do it. So it was, that was what everybody was thinking. We've played every pub in town that will book us, and you know, now we should go to London, because the alternative was, you know, you'd do the old Oz rock trail of playing a lot of small shows up and down the East Coast.
Yeah.
And with the kind of music we were doing, that was pretty brave.
You mentioned the birthday party,
Yeah.
that then became, in some way, the Bad Seeds, no? Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
It mutated into the Bad Seeds.
Yeah. How did it happen for you to join that band, and how was it to work with Nick Cave and Blicia Bargeld?
Yeah, well, it was really amazing. How did it happen? I think it kind of started when I had a band at that time called Plays with Marionettes, and we were definitely art rock, and not very much rock, more art than rock. I think we had to fire the drummer because he couldn't keep time. I think it was a musical thing. We had to get rid of the drummer, but we had some shows booked, and so we were in a predicament. Like, what are we going to do? I can't remember how this all came together. But anyway, I asked Mick Harvey if he'd be interested to step in and play the drums with us, and he was like, "Yeah, sure, all right, let's do it." I don't remember rehearsing. I think we might have had a long sound check, and then we did, you know, a few shows. But so I think first I had this connection with Mick, and then my mother tells me that she remembers a show that I played in Melbourne in 1982, around then, and she came in the backstage, and she remembers meeting Nick and Roland for the first time, because she was pretty shocked about them. I think just about the way they looked. I think they were well behaved, but I think the look of them just was like, she was like, who are these people?
But then you quit the band. Why?
Well, when we first cooked up this plan that I'd kind of take over where Roland had been in a band that was no longer the Birthday Party. It was actually called Man on Myth. Cave Man on Myth. And he wasn't really sure about what he wanted to do. And so basically we had an agreement that I'd go over to London and finish helping finish that first record, From Her to Eternity. And then we'd do a tour and that would be it. So I didn't actually have any expectation that I'd keep on playing because I was always very into my own thing. I was not a kid who was like sort of playing a supporting role. I guess my ego was too big or something. So we kind of had this agreement, but you know what actually happened as well was that the tour that we did for From Her to Eternity was really devastating. It was incredibly hard work and there were a lot of drugs involved inside of it. And I think it kind of blew my mind. I mean, I couldn't wait to get away. You know, I liked the European tour, but the US tour was just like, it was just too heavy. So I was kind of glad to get out of it. And then I got back to Melbourne and I really missed it. It had been so exciting, it was just all a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because it was in a phase before Nick was like truly famous as he is today, and we didn't have very much money, and everything was kind of like rough and ready. You know, we didn't have much rehearsal, we didn't have the right equipment, we had long travel distances, and so it was just really hardcore basically. And I really loved a lot of it, but I didn't love all of it. So I was ready to go when I left, but then I missed the whole thing, and of course I loved Nick's music of that time, and I loved working with everyone in that whole scene, with Barry and Blixer and Mick, and also Tracy was playing bass on that first Man on Myth tour.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I knew everybody and I liked everybody, so in the years that followed, when I got an opportunity to drop into the studio and drop guitar on a track or two, I'd do that, and that was a lot of fun.
You did?
I did, so I kept sort of turning up at sessions or being invited, you know, by somebody in the band. It's like, you know, hey, we're recording today, and why don't you come by and see what's happening? And so I kept playing on various records, but then the music really changed direction, and I couldn't really relate to it anymore by the end of the 80s, so I kind of stopped, and I dropped back in for Murder Ballads, which is a really awesome record. In the mid-90s, but that was the last time I collaborated with Nick on anything, I think. Yeah. And also there was a film in there somewhere, Ghosts of the Civil Dead. When was that? 1987, 1986, around there. And so I was writing with Nick on that and a few other people. And that was really amazing. So it wasn't just about music, it was about, you know, other kind of creative acts as well.
Yeah, but then later on in the late 80s, 1989, you relocated in Berlin, and actually you already worked with Blisha Bargeld, and then you did with Alexander Ake from Einsturz and Neubauten, so two members, and other German musicians.
Yeah, yeah.
So first question, were you there when there was the fall of the wall? And because it was November 89, and how was the West Berlin, I guess, music scene in those days?
Well, you know, it was really something special. The city was really particular. I mean, I went there the first time in 1984 with Bad Seeds, and I was really amazed. It really blew me away. I'd never seen anything like West Berlin in 1984. When I got back there in 1989, it had changed a little bit. It wasn't as deeply alternative as it had been in 1984, but it was still a pretty unique situation. And, you know, actually, I originally went and lived in London that year. I left Australia earlier in the year, and I was in London for a few months, but I wasn't really enjoying myself there. I still don't really relate to London as a city. I don't know why not, because, you know, my roots are Anglo-Irish, but actually I don't. And a friend of mine called me up and said, why don't you come over to Berlin? You know, like there's shows that you could be doing here. You're bored in London. Everything's far away and expensive and it's a grind. So why don't you come over here? So I went over there for a week and did some shows and met a few people, and I was like, oh yeah, this is it. You know, this is a really cool scene because on the one hand, people were really friendly, and on the other hand, they were kind of scary, and they were doing dangerous and amazing things. So I found that very attractive. But you know, it was really welcoming going there. Made friends with a lot of people very, very quickly, and it really came together. You know, like I got a German record label contract a few months later, and then that meant putting together a German band, really, with Rainer Link from Die Haut and John Molyneux from Flucht Vorn and Ralph Droger, who was and still is an amazing musician. And so we had this whole thing going. So I just really fell into Germany, actually, but through Berlin. And I think the first tour that we did in West Germany was illuminating because the difference between the real Germany and West Berlin was very clear to me, that Berlin was this special space where weird shit happened and it was okay, you know. No one was going to shut you down.
Do you remember anything about the fall of the wall? Because everything was changing in the...
Oh, yeah.
It was late 89, so...
Yeah, I mean, sure, I remember it. We were working on this record in the studio, and the studio was in the basement of the house where I was living. And it was like a large apartment with a basement and a studio in the basement. And in the apartment, there was me and my girlfriend and John and his girlfriend and her little boy, and Rainer Link was living there sometimes too, so it was kind of a collective situation in this apartment. And we had, I had a radio, and so I was listening every day to BBC News of the World, so every day I was getting more and more information, and then my friend Chris Hughes came over from Melbourne, who ended up working with me and still does. And his girlfriend was Romanian, so they went down to Timișoara, and I remember him calling me up from the phone box saying, they're shooting at us, and like it was all really close, it was all really happening, and I didn't have enough perspective at that time to understand the real significance of everything that was happening, but you could feel this like strange atmosphere, because there was a sense in West Berlin that they were going to be overrun by people from East Germany, you know. So when the wall fell, there was a mixture of excitement and fear in a lot of ways.
You lived for a while in Sicily, Italy. When was it and for how long? And why Sicily?
Well, this, you know, in my case, this is the Italian connection again, right? To be honest about it, so I had a very long story with a girl who was the daughter of an Italian immigrant family in Melbourne, and her parents didn't really speak English at all, but I got to know them pretty well in the years to follow, and we traveled everywhere together for about 15 years and made two beautiful kids who are grown up now, and they've got like Italian passports. So this thing actually starts kind of like way back. And we first went to Italy in 1990, I think, after the fall of the wall. I remember buying a car. It was a great Volkswagen Passat, silver. We drove that down to Abruzzo to visit her family that she'd actually never met. And that didn't turn out very well, but it was quite interesting. I think our values were very different to her family in the Abruzzo Mountains, but still it was amazing. And then I met a few people, and pretty soon had a friend who wanted to be a booking agent, so he experimented on me in the early 90s by setting up these solo shows, and I played a lot in Bologna and in the Romagna area at that time, and in Tuscany too. It was great, you know, I loved it. You know, I pretty much fell in love with Italy when I first saw it coming down out of Bolzano. So it's been going on ever since, but that's how it all started in reality. And then, even before we split, I remember we were down in Italy with both kids, so that was somewhere in Sicily. I mean, that was somewhere in the mid-90s. There is an Australian avant-garde musician called Cat Hope, Catherine Hope, Hope, from Perth. She lives in Melbourne now. But she was putting together a cool band in Catania because she had married a lighting rigger from Catania, Antonello. And I knew her, she was a friend of mine, and she was down there, and I thought that sounded kind of exciting. So I remember going down to Catania for the first time, and that blew my mind immediately, because that's just an incredible city like no other that I can really think of, except for Naples. It's like a more manageable version of Naples, maybe. And so Kat had this band, and actually that's how I met Giombini, who's the guitarist in Fatalists, because he was in this band with Kat and also with Mattei.
Yeah.
So that was Maisfeis, and that was my first trip. No, it wasn't. It was actually, it gets confusing because I remember I was down in Agrigento, and it must have been earlier, and this was with Anita Lane.
Anita Lane, yeah.
We were great friends, and she was living in Palermo. I think we started off in Agrigento. So anyway, her husband, Andrea, he set up a house in the country for me and my girlfriend and our two kids to live in, which was actually a private home that was kept so as that the gentlemen could get together and play cards. So the whole house was kind of like a card house. And we were there, and living there for a few months actually, and that's where the song San Leone comes from. It's about that house that we kind of mafioso house that we lived in for 2 months.
The Italian connection is still keep going, because I know about this project you have with a bunch of Italian musicians. The project is called Music with Other Strangers, right?
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is Cesare Basile, Manuel Agnelli,
Rodrigo
D'Erasmo, Marta Collica,
Giorgia
Poli, together with John Parrish, Steph Camille Carlin, and Steve Wynn.
Yeah, he turned up a couple of times, and there were a few other Italian musicians that passed through it.
But my question is it just a live project, or are you planning to make a record?
Well, there's 10 people in the band, and I think half of them went up to Steph Carlin's studio in
Belgium.
Yeah, in Antwerpen.
Yeah.
And they made half a record. It's pretty good. But we haven't made the other half yet. I remember trying to get it together with Cesare Basile for us to go down there and complete. I can't remember why we didn't do it. Look, one thing about a group that big with working artists in it is that it's very difficult to bring everyone together.
Yeah.
It's not impossible that, you know, we get back together, but in reality, I only just managed to escape Australia. I mean, they had the border closed until the end of last year. You couldn't leave. It was just such a radical situation. So I'm just really happy that I'm here. Yeah. And if I can get together with all of those great people, that'd be cool.
Yeah, it would be amazing.
Yeah.
And you are here in Rome to promote your brand new album, just released in April 2022. And what's the title? Once Upon a Time in Italy. And I've seen on the merch that there is an EP with 4 tracks sung in Italian. Is it you singing?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, sure is. I mean, you know, I speak Italian in my way. 2 of those songs I wrote in Italian. So during these sessions, during the lockdown, you know, once I'd arrived on the idea that the record would be called Once Upon a Time in Italy, which was a reference to me and my connection and to nostalgia, but was also a little bit about epic Italian cinema soundtracks.
Oh, yeah.
Something that we all love. They're part of kind of our Fatalists thing. Like when this idea came up, that maybe some of the albums should be sung in Italian. At that point, it was like part of the album would actually be in Italian, not like a bonus record. I worked on 2 songs, writing them in Italian, and I approached them in a kind of strange way. I started from Ovid, translated from the Latin into Italian, and kind of sort of stole some ideas from a dead, Latin poet. And then once I kind of got the language crunching, I put my own thing inside it and found the stories, because all the songs have got stories in them. And then I got Massimiliano La Rocca, who's a singer-songwriter from Florence, to go over the lyrics with me and sort of make sure that everything made sense, because he's a very good English speaker and singer. And that's how we put them together. But then the idea came up to release the record with the Florentine label Santeria Records. And I talked to them about what we had, and they said, let's make a separate record.
Yeah.
So then I went back and took 2 other songs and did Italian recordings of the voice on them.
Yeah. Sounds great.
It was a lot of fun.
I'm very looking forward to your gig tonight, and thanks so much for your time. I know dinner is waiting for you.
Thanks, Dario.
Cheers, mate.